Hello, Ben Serruys again with part 2 of the Induction Tutor training. In this video, I'm going to cover ECT Manager, your first meeting with the ECT, and the monitoring cycle. A quick look then at ECT Manager, which you may already have seen. Once we have received your signed service level agreement, your head teacher will be able to create an account on ECT Manager for you as Induction Tutor. You may well be the head teacher, in which case you would have done this already. All of the details for your school, everyone involved, including the ECTs, will need to be uploaded onto ECT Manager prior to induction. Now, there's a few key features for tutors. Firstly, is paperless reporting. So as I mentioned in video 1, all the reports you submit will be done on ECT Manager. It's all digital. There is a raise alert button. As I've mentioned before, though, you can always get in touch with us by phone or email. We provide proformas in the resources section of ECT Manager. There are various proformas, for example, for lesson observations, for personal support plans, for action plans. There's things on there you can use if you wish. They're not obligatory, but they include the things that we like to see. So not a bad idea if you don't have one already. It's also where we store the information. Each of your ECTs will have their own profile, and on that profile will be all of the reports that have been submitted so far, as well as their contract details and other details that we may need to refer to. Just to talk through a couple of these sections on here, if we go through the tabs at the top there, your ECTs, that's the tab to click to access your ECT or ECTs, and then you can select the one you want to dip into the profile for. Assessments, these are probably most easily accessed by the ECT's profile itself, but you can find the ones you need to fill in the next tab. Tutors, that's the detail of all the tutors, which may just be one, who are registered with your school. Skipping along to, we've got resources. This is the section I've made reference to a few times. This is where you can find things like our handbook, the Induction Tutor checklist, the proformas that we've created and are available for you to borrow. And there is some ECT help and support there as well. Just by looking at the icons underneath, you can see a few of the other ways that you can access some of these details, but essentially most of what you need will be in those tabs at the top. So let's take ourselves past that. We've got onto ECT Manager. Everyone's fully registered. Induction has started. There should be a first meeting, if it hasn't happened already, between you and the ECT. Now, this is for a few different purposes. Firstly, is to make sure you have a shared understanding of what induction is, what it involves. It's about setting the expectations for what your professional relationship will look like. Things like, how you're going to interact before and between meetings. It's also an opportunity for some reassurance, because although your primary role is as assessor, as the person who will make an approval or will recommend a failure of induction at the end of the 2-year period, you are also there as part of the support mechanism. You're the person who will coordinate support in school, might even offer some of it yourself. The feedback you give following things like observations should be constructive and therefore helpful. So it's about letting them know that you're not just there to be an assessor, you're also there to support them with their induction. This is also a really good opportunity for you to think about laying out very clearly the cycle that you've created for them of observations and of feedback and of assessment in general. You can think about things like timelines, making sure you avoid things like clashes. You can provide them with the name of their contact at the appropriate body, as I outlined in a previous video, Susie Waters. And if you've got access to it, you've got their documents from the ITT provider, which will give you a really good starting point. It will give you a sense of what their strengths are, their areas for development, And this might well be what you use to create their very first action plan. Remember, there should be an action plan for each ECT, which is regularly updated. We recommend half-termly, but it's slightly different from that, but regularly is the key. And the action plan allows you to provide holistic support throughout their induction period, which is targeted and unique for them. So next, I'm going to talk about that half-termly induction monitoring cycle itself, which can be represented here on this graphic. It's shown as a cycle because it is. We've got observation with feedback given afterwards. This helps to inform the creation of the action plan or to amend the action plan. And all of this and other evidence leads to the reviews that you write and submit to us as the appropriate body. We'll focus on that little bit in the middle to start with, the teacher standards. Just a quick reminder of what they are. They are the rubric against which, in this case, ECTs are assessed. There are 8 standards. There's also a part 2, which relates to personal and professional conduct. Those standards will provide some continuity from the training year. So the ECTs will know about these already, but the induction period is about becoming more competent and being able to apply those skills in a deeper way. And they're also going to be what you use to create your targets that you set for them. This is what they look like. You'll know these already, but feel free to pause the screen now to remind yourself. So they do the following things. They are a tool for you as tutors because you can continually come back to these teachers' standards. This is what you're assessing against in your observations. It's what you're giving feedback on. It's what your targets are stemming from in the action plan. And it's what we ask you to refer specifically to in your termly reports to us. It gives you some shared language with the ECT. It gives you the professional standards and all the different areas of practice on which they'll need to work. And it also allows you to create a progression model that's suitable for that ECT. Going back to this graphic then, let's think about the observation and feedback in a little bit more detail. I've put under there with the asterisks that the observations and meeting notes are to be recorded and shared with the ECT. I've already mentioned they should be open and transparent. I've mentioned also, but we'll repeat, that it's good practice to have the ECT read and sign to show that they've agreed with the feedback you've given. Now, the observations themselves will give you lots of evidence. And that is likely to be the bulk of what you comment on in your termly reports, but there are other forms of evidence as well. So, for example, you can look at all the other things you would do when conducting monitoring in the school, pupils' work, lesson plans, self-evaluations, reflections, any feedback you get from parents or from pupils themselves or colleagues. It can be what you've noticed about their application, their engagement with their CPD. And it could be particularly for part 2, for section 8 of the teacher standards, it could be how have they involved themselves in school life? Have they got involved with things outside of their classroom? When it comes to lesson observations, though, it's really important to stay focused, keep those notes related to the teacher's standards, be as specific and constructive as you can be, should lead to personal objectives. I've mentioned before that we're looking for, in the first month of employment, that first formal observation to have taken place and to have been uploaded to ECT Manager. For that to have led to your next iteration of the action plan. Importantly, and we do get lots of questions about this, and it might be a good point just to freeze the screen here to read this. The third bullet point under the process section there, the majority of observations should be undertaken by you as tutor. Now that's so that you as tutor can retain a really good understanding of the progress being made by that ECT, but that doesn't mean that you have to conduct all of their formal observations. In fact, it's a good idea occasionally to broker support from someone else, another senior leader, for example, who can give a second opinion, can help validate what you're seeing and what you're saying, and could perhaps, in their feedback to the ECT, offer a new perspective on teaching. And the final point there is to make sure that all your paperwork is available for everyone. Now, if you are watching this video and holding this role, it is very likely that you have conducted dozens, potentially hundreds of observations in the past, but we think it's a really good idea to keep reviewing the rubric really for it, what makes an effective observation feedback. So let's just go around this hexagon. We've got prompt feedback. To state the obvious, it should happen as soon after the lesson itself as is possible. Should be reflective, so we should offer opportunities for the ECT to reflect on their performance in that lesson and more broadly, with you there to guide as the more senior and more experienced professional. Should be really focused. If you're giving feedback, make sure they know what it is you're referring to specifically. Giving examples from the lesson you've seen. You might notice lots of different things, particularly early on in induction, that you'd like to set as targets, but how are you going to prioritize those to make sure that the correct things are worked on first? And it should be honest. You want to give lots of nice feedback, of course you do, but if something's not quite right, if there are areas of practice that are concerning you, then you will need to say that and address that, and that's all part of the process of improvement. I'm not going to linger too much on this because we've talked a little about the action plan already, but I will just quickly show you what the action plan template that we've got looks like. As I've mentioned, this is not the one you must use, but it is available for you in the resources section of ECT Manager if you would like to. On it will need to be, and this is probably the thing I have to give the feedback on the most when I'm reviewing action plans or personal support plans, really clear targets. What are the targets? What is the support that's going to be put in place to help with that? And what's the time frame? Just as we did for feedback from observations, let's just rehash what it means to give effective targets. It should be precise and specific, should be linked to the teacher's standards, should retain that focus on its impact on pupils' learning, should be actionable, i.e. the ECT is in a place now where they're ready to put that into action and to give it a go, and they have a chance of achieving it. And it should be developmental because you're trying to move their practice on. All of this contributes towards the transparency that we've talked about. It contributes towards giving you evidence to writing your formal assessments. The better you've kept notes in things like your formal meetings and your formal observations, then the more evidence you'll have to go by when you want to write your end of term reports. It's also important to say that if the ECT does not meet the teacher standards by the end of the induction period, we are going to ask for the evidence trail to try to find and uncover the story that led to that point. And if it comes to them making them appealing that decision with the TRA would want to see that trail as well. So really good idea to stay on top of the record keeping for each of your ECTs. Finally, just to think about managing your workload as induction tutor, because it can be quite a busy role, particularly if you've got more than one ECT. A few things to think about though. When you write your formal assessments at the end of the term or your progress reviews, we're not looking for essays. Yes, we are looking for evidence and we are looking for reference to the teacher's standards, but it can be succinct. You do need to be specific to that ECT. So if you've got more than one, the reports should look different because it's unlikely they've got the same strengths and development areas. You don't need to create anything new for evidence. So it's perfectly acceptable to reuse, as it says in the final bullet point, strong statements from previous reports you sent to us. It's perfectly acceptable for you to use the evidence from your school's monitoring, from your observations. You don't need to yourself create anything, and certainly don't need to ask the ECT to create anything new to contribute towards your report. That would just unnecessarily add to their workload. If you've stayed on top of your note keeping, then you won't need to ask for anything new. Just before we finish this video, let's go through some key messages about your role. Every half term, one observation followed by a review meeting. Make sure your feedback is developmental, and make sure all targets you set and all feedback you give and your comments in the end of term reports reference specifically the teacher stats. Okay, that's the end of part 2. I hope it's been useful.